This week, we begin the fifth and final book of the Torah, Deuteronomy. At first glance, it feels strangely familiar. Haven't we heard these stories before? The Exodus, Sinai, the spies, the wilderness wanderings? It's all repetition. But maybe repetition isn't a flaw. Maybe it's the point. Why does Moses spend his final weeks retelling a story everyone already knows? Why do the rabbis praise the student who reviews a lesson 101 times? And why does Ben Bog famously teach, turn it over and turn it over, for everything is in it? 2,000 years ago, the Roman philosopher Seneca warned that reading too many scrolls too quickly would leave us distracted, restless, and unable to think deeply. Sound familiar? In an age of endless scrolling and shrinking attention spans, perhaps Deuteronomy has something surprising to teach us about the art of paying attention. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Jeffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform, and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sefaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week's Parsha is Devarim. Join us as we explore Deuteronomy and the art of attention, and discover why Moses' final retelling of the Torah may offer the oldest and perhaps the best antidote to our modern epidemic of distraction. Well, welcome back, Rabbi. We missed you last week, but
it's nice to be back. But you had a great conversation.
It was truly illuminating. And one of the things that he said towards the end was, we're finishing the Torah. And of course, he was right, because Numbers ends the Torah, and Mishneh Torah, the name for Deuteronomy, really means a copy of the Torah. And that's where the Greek Deuteronomy comes from, second law. So it really is a review. It's a repetition. And that's what we're going to focus on today. In the yeshiva, we called it Chazarah.
But and in yeshiva, Chazarah was important. And I think when it comes to the book of Deuteronomy, that's also important.
I mean, to give you a sense of what Chazarah was, and I think I did come across it a little bit in college, where you would have a professor give a class, and then there was a TA, and the teacher's assistant would come out later and meet in smaller groups. But in the yeshiva, you would prepare for a shiur, a class b'chavrusa, and then you would go over it b'chavrusa. And at least my experience was, for instance, in Be'er Yaakov, where the mashgiach gave most of his really exciting shmuzin on Shabbat, you couldn't write it down.
You couldn't write it down.
So you literally had to review it. And many of the great books that we have, for instance, on many of the Hasidic great leaders, they never wrote it down. It's their students who kind of wrote it down. So this is a big part of our tradition.
Very important. Okay, let's go for it.
Okay, so it's only in Deuteronomy 18 where it actually uses this word Mishneh Torah, and there, of course, it is talking about the rules of the kings, and they shall have a copy of this teaching written for him, for the king. But again, this has been the traditional explanation of what Mishneh Torah is, this fifth book of the Torah. And of course, a lot of time is spent, Rabbi, on nitpicking and seeing how in the repetition maybe the story changes, maybe how a different phrase is used, word is used. We're going to explore just the story of the scouts in a few minutes, but of course, and I'm quoting from a Sefaria, a wonderful source that I discovered, where he gives an introduction, and he says the people, the scholars from the critical theory, obviously who believe that the Torah was written by many different authors, they will argue that that's not a big surprise. Deuteronomy was edited by a different editor, and different sources got inside. We find that even in the Mishnah, where we have the Mishnah and then we have a Braita, and the Braita maybe didn't make the Mishnah, but it's a variation of it. It's at the most most basic level, this is variant texts, and that truly is something that is part of our tradition as well. We understood way back when there was no only recording; there
Right.
were
That's great.
variations on everything. It's really baked into our tradition.
Amazing. Really good.
So I do think, though, that even the classical commentators clearly, and I've always argued this, there's nothing that modern scholarship has brought up by way of a question or a problem that the classical commentaries didn't already identify. And so, for instance, they will ask, so why were they repeated? What laws were repeated? So, by way of example, Ramban Nachmanides says, this book is known to constitute a review of the Torah. He uses that same word, Sefer Hazeh, Yeduashu Mishneh Torah, in which Moses, our teacher, explains to the generation entering the land most of the commandments of the Torah that pertain to Israelites, and he distinguishes that from the priests. The priests, Nachmanides, for some reason, says they don't need that much Chazarah. They got it the first time. But the rest of us, Pashut Yisraelim, we need to be repeatedly admonished. And he uses this word, Yachzir Otam. This word from Chazarah, we have to be reminded. Sometimes you have to repeat the things, multiple warnings, so forth and so on. So again, Nachmanides recognizes what is going on, and his take is this is like cliff notes before you go into the land. You know, your mom told you everything, then as you're at the door about to go, she gives you the short version. Don't forget
Right.
this, don't forget that. Interesting.
Well, I mean, interesting and logical. I mean, it makes sense that that's what they need. Especially, you see, repetition is important because Moshe is going to die,
He's not going to be there.
right?
And
And
they're on the
that's a
banks of the
very
Moab and
important
they're
piece of the
moving.
puzzle.
It's part of the transmission process. It's part of creating something that lasts beyond you. I love that. So we're going to take one example, but there will be many examples in the book of Dvarim where there are variations. So we're going to talk about the seminal moment of sending the scouts. In Deuteronomy 122, part of our Parsha, it says, "Then all of you came to me," says Moses, "and said, 'Let us send agents ahead to reconnoiter the land for us and bring back word.'" In 23, he says, "I approved of the plan, and so I selected 12 of you, one representative from each tribe." So first of all, it just right from the beginning, it tells us what we already know, which is the whole book of Devarim is written in the first person. It's Moses speaking. This is novel. This is not something that we've had. But more to that, you could say that Moses is looking at it from his perspective, but
Right. It means he
certainly
changes the story and gives it from the way he remembers it.
or this is the way it was, and the other version is a different
Right. That's
variation.
correct. It's not good.
In Numbers 13, this is the fourth book of the Torah, it says God spoke to Moses saying, "Sent agents to scout the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelite people, and someone of each tribe." In verse 3, so Moses, by God's command, sent them out from the wilderness of Paran. Rabbi, this is not a sleight of hand. It's clear in the Devarim text. It's I. Moses is the one who's taking responsibility,
And the
authority.
people approach Moses. And in Numbers, God is the one who commands Moses to send the spies. The whole story is different.
So, just to give you an example of how these variations stimulate thought, I'm going to quote Rashi, not because I think he's convincing, but because, again, he shows you the type of, gymnastics that have to be done if you want to reconcile the two texts. So, Rashi in Numbers says, "According to your own judgment, shalach lecha, I do not command you, but if you wish to do so, send them. So he's caging here. He's saying God didn't tell Moses to do it. He simply gave Moses permission to do it. And that, of course, reconciles it with our verse in Deuteronomy. But I would argue that, in fact, what we are seeing in front of us is two variations, and those variations elicit different approaches. And maybe you can say elu ve'elu, that this one and this one, they're both true from a certain
Good.
perspective.
Good. Okay, that's an interesting approach, that they're both true. It just depends how you look at it. Now it's hard because God commands Moshe to send the spies, and the people approach Moshe. You need to tell a different story. You need to say the people initiated it, and then because the people initiated it, God commanded Moses to send the spies. That's a twist.
And again, I'm sure if this was the subject matter of today's discussion, we would find 5, 10, 15 other variations on this, which we're trying to reconcile. And maybe they would say, like me, that they're different, but they're both true. The point is that reading a story, or I would say telling a story at least twice, you're going to get some variation. And that, I think, is the point, and that, I think, has gotten our attention. And today we're talking about how do you keep attention, and what is the best defense against attention disorder, where you stop being attentive and you stop growing with the texts. So we're going to go to the Mishnah in Avot, and I've quoted this before. It says, Ben Bagbag said, I'll get to his name in a second, turn it over and turn it over, for all is therein, and look into it and become gray and old therein, and do not move away from it, for you have no better portion than it. So first of all, I could not but be amazed, Rabbi. I think I'm going to quote another Gemara from Chagiga in a second, and there we quote a bar hey hey. It is kind of funny that the two scholars who are talking about repetition, their
Have
name
funny
is
names.
not only funny, but the name repeats itself,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
It's fascinating. But in any case, what does he say? He says a few things. He says, hafachbo v'hafachbo, which really means to go in it over and over, turn it over, look at it anew each time. And then he talks about this being a life endeavor, grow gray and old with it. And then something that I had tried to ignore last time I mentioned this Mishnah, he says, don't go to other sources. Stay with this source and keep at it. Keep constantly going back to it. And I think, again, this is part of the Mishneh Torah tradition that we are exploring today. But it's a wonderful, a seminal expression, is it not?
Yeah, well, and don't move away from it. Because that's that's what generally you do. After you go through something once or a few times, you tend to move on to the next thing. And what they say is, when it comes to Torah, don't move on to the next thing, but continue to focus on this.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think that we're going to see, and it is going to blow us away. I hope that Seneca, the Roman philosopher, said something very similar. And I'm curious to know whether anyone listening or you, Rabbi, think that there might have been some influence. But let's continue. In Chagiga, the Gemara records another discussion between Bar Hai and Hillel. Bar Hai said to Hillel, "What is the meaning of that which is written? Then you shall again discern between the righteous and the wicked, between he who serves God and he who does not serve him." This is a verse in Malachi. There are two redundancies, the righteous who serves and the wicked. So what does he answer? He says, one who reviews his studies 100 times is not comparable to one who reviews his studies 101 times. And then I love the fact that they use the modern day equivalent of an Uber driver, the monkey of donkey drivers, as proof. And what they say is if you buy a pack of tickets from the donkey driver for 10 and you need to get an 11th ride, you've got to buy 20. So what they're trying to say is it's not incrementally one more. Now you're going into the next 100 of studyings. But I think what they're also saying, and I might be going out on a ledge here, is that this is practical. You can learn it from real life. You can learn it from donkey drivers. This need to repeat stuff is powerful tool for pedagogy and for learning.
The idea is, of course, if you buy the extra one, if you need the extra ride, you have to buy the extra 10, is that you should always be looking forward, always study more. You may not know yet that you need to study more, but always be looking forward to studying more. It's a great image, right? It's a Uber driver image. It's a good image. Though
Yeah,
we
you know,
don't
I
buy
had
Uber we don't buy Uber tickets by the 10.
no, not that. If they listen to the podcast, they might come out with that idea.
Right.
It'll be a new subscription model. But, I didn't put it in the show notes, but I think Malcolm Gladwell once talked about the difference between good to great is practice. And he actually kind of documented how many times the Beatles practiced, how many times musicians and actors practice. There is no question that repetition is something that is coming across loud and clear in our tradition, and it's worth stopping and focusing on, I believe. So in the Talmud in Avodah Zarah 19a, it says, the Gemara cites other statements relating to Torah study. Rava said that Rav Sephora said that Rav Huna says, what is the meaning of that which is written? Wealth gotten through vanity, mehevel, shall be diminished, but he who gathers little by little shall increase. It's a verse in Proverbs. It says, what is the meaning? If a person turns his Torah into many bundles, they take the word hevel and they change it into chavilot, which is in modern day Hebrew, when you come back from the grocery store with a bunch of packages, you're carrying chavilot. By studying large amount in short period of time without reviewing his Torah will diminish. But if he gathers his knowledge little by little, by studying slowly and reviewing his knowledge, that shall increase. So here again, what they're looking at in the yeshiva, we would call Bekirs and Ba'irn. In a normal nomenclature, we would call encyclopedic study and study in depth. And
That's
they
good.
are
That's a good translation of terms that you really never ever translate.
And now, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing we value at Matlik Podcast, it's reading texts and talking about them. That's why I'm excited to share something I created called Voice Gift Play. It fits in the palm of your hand like a remote control and clips onto any book. It's inspired by those old school museum audio guides, but this is personal. Voice Gift Play stores up to 10 hours of audio across 999 numbered recordings. You simply enter a number to record a comment, memory, or explanation, and enter the same number to play it back. It's perfect for B'nai Mitzvah practicing their laning, capturing Grandpa's favorite tune, or recording Chad Gad Yar in a voice that matters. Go to voice.gift. That's www.voice.gift and use code MADLIK for 15% off. Thanks. And now back to our podcast. So it really is. I must say, I tried to do a Daf Yomi for about a year and a half. That's all I lasted.
You didn't
I'm
enjoy
not.
it because you couldn't really understand it, right?
I love to dive deep. I love to
Right.
dive deep and not so wide.
Me too.
And that's what we do on Madlik, week in and week out. But I love the fact that the rabbis are talking about pedagogy, and they're talking about it in a very profound way. And they're saying literally that you have to take your study in little bite-sized pieces and then savor them and go over them and review them. And that is, in fact, the biggest, I think, way to ensure that they affect you and they change the way your life is. And I have a friend who's a defense lawyer for criminals, and when it comes to the police and lawyers, they have techniques about making the potential criminal repeat the story over and over again. We all know they divide the people if there were two culprits to get variations of the story. But just having the same person repeat the story over again is to look for consistency. They have getting new details, asking an individual to walk through an event again often leads to reminiscence, remembering minor details that didn't seem important in the first telling. I love this increasing cognitive load. So by asking someone to recount the subject and write it over again, maybe outside of chronological order, increases the mental effort required, which makes people say things that they might not have thought of before or make them slip. I think that it's a fascinating mirror to look at how lawyers and police use repetition to try to get to the truth. And clearly, there's always going to be cross-examination. But you have all of this in the way that our texts are studied. And I think what comes clear from this, I'd love to know your take, is that we have nothing to hide. In other words, we are willing to project and to enable our texts to be looked at in multiple ways. We are not afraid of the variant readings. If you go back to that concept of different texts make it into the canon, I just think it's a wonderful lens to look at this through in terms of the techniques we use
Shivim
to
panim la
discuss.
Torah is an old famous idea, right? There are 70 faces to the Torah. So that's interesting. Rabbi Lamb, who was the president of Yeshiva University, his book is called 70 Faces of the Torah, his collection of his sermons, because there are so many different ways to look at it. And that's what's so great. Madlik is like the rabbi's sermon. He gives a sermon on the same portion every single year. And the good rabbi knows how to turn it over and over 70 different ways.
But again, I think the Shivim Panim LaTorah, that there were 70 faces to the Torah, and the other phrase that I used, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim
Right.
chayim, that this, and what of course you're referring to is, the joke about the rabbi who talks to a husband and wife who are having an argument, and he comes out and he goes, well, the wife is right, and then he listens to the husband and he goes, the husband is right. So his Rebbitzin system, how can they both be right? And he goes, you're right
You're
also.
right too.
The point is that by saying Shivim Panim LaTorah, especially when it comes to a sacred text, I think is radical. Because what we're saying is that there, at least from our perspective, there is no ultimate truth. There are different faces, different lenses that we can look at, and different reflections that reflect maybe the same kernel. But clearly, we submit, is the word I was looking for. We submit our texts to the same type of critical review that I think is in a court of law, even if that's capital punishment and criminal law.
Fantastic.
So what I discovered, and I discovered it from an amazing article. It was an op-ed in the New York Times this past week. And what the op-ed was called is, there's an ancient solution to our modern crisis of attention. It was written by a professor, S.J. Murray, who is a professor of great texts and creative writing at Baylor University. And and he quotes Seneca. I had never realized that Lucius Annaeus Seneca he was born in Cordova, Spain in 4 BC. I mean, Cordova is a
You didn't know that
rich
anybody was in Cordoba, Spain in 4 BC.
he wasn't, and maybe when he left a few things in the water, because Cordova, is a key city. Many great scholars passed through it. I
The
think.
Rambam was there from southern Spain. That's where the Rambam was born. Yeah, it's very important there.
Okay, so there was something in the water, but again, putting it into context, this is before the rabbis of the Talmud. And I would say that Seneca could have been fairly widely read. Listen to what he says. And now I'm quoting from Letters from a Stoic, letter number 2. Judging from what you tell me and from what I hear, I feel that you show great promise. I think he's writing to a student. You do not tear from place to place and unsettle yourself with one move after another. Restlessness of that sort is symptomatic of a sick mind. Nothing, to my way of thinking, is a better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company. Be careful, however, that there is no element of discursiveness and desultoriness about this reading you refer to, this reading of many different authors and books of every description. You should be extending your stay among writers whose genius is unquestionable, deriving constant nourishment from them if you wish to gain anything from your reading that will find a lasting place in your mind. To be everywhere is to be nowhere.
It's a great
People
phrase.
he could have been a existentialist. People who spend their whole life traveling abroad end up having plenty of places where they can find hospitality, but no real friendships. The same must needs be the case with people who never set about acquiring an intimate acquaintanceship with any one great writer, but skip from one to another, paying flying visits to all of them. I mean, this is the second part of Hafachbar v'Hafachbar, that he says you've got, even until your old age, these are your friends, and you've got to come back to them over and over again. And then he says something that this op-ed picks up on, and actually the professor says he literally uses it. And Rabbi, I have to say, because I prepare for Madlik every week, I end up doing this organically. He says, each day, 2, acquire something which will help you to face poverty or death and other ills as well. After running over a lot of different thoughts, pick out one to be digested throughout that day. This is what I do myself, he says. Out of the many bits I have been reading, I lay hold of one.
Fantastic.
So it's like every week I try to pick a nugget, and I've got to say, you're
And
thinking about
you
it.
have to do that, because to be everywhere is to be nowhere. So if you just say, I want to study the whole parsha, you won't be anywhere. You have to pick out one thing.
It's truly amazing. So this is what this professor writes in the New York Times. He says Seneca's concept corresponds to what psychologists call deep processing. By returning to the same idea repeatedly, we signal to our brain that the idea is worth moving into the architecture of long-term memory. Each time we retrieve an idea from memory, we also wrap it in new associations, a process known as reconsolidation, which ensures that those ideas remain relevant to our life as time goes on. About
Amazing.
2,000 years ago, the Roman philosopher Seneca warned of a crisis of attention. The problem wasn't caused by smartphones or TikTok, writes this professor. It was because papyrus had become more widely available. As a result, scrolls became plentiful, and wealthy leaders had access to more texts than ever before. Seneca observed that the minds of those who read too many scrolls too quickly became restless and unsteady. This kind of mind was less able, he noted, to stay in one place and spend time with itself. Seneca did not have access to modern scientific studies or survey data, but he would not have been surprised by our plight. Professors report that students now have difficulty watching feature-length films, let alone finishing books.
It's fantastic. And it's right, of course.
So I just feel there were parts of the Talmud that I didn't even reference. I think it was in Avodah Zarah where they had different of the rabbis saying they finished reading the Parsha, and one of them wanted to read Tehillim, and another one wanted to read Mishlei, and they were really talking. And I think the overwhelming approach was stick to something that you really believe in. Don't go from book to book. But the parallelism of these two, of Seneca and the Talmudic rabbis, is amazing. One thing I will say for the rabbis, that as much or as little as they reflected what they read in Seneca, their traditions have stayed the test of time, whereas Seneca needs a New York op-ed to
To
remind
get to
us.
bring him back.
Because truly, what we do week in and week out is truly that. It's to review the same material over again, to hold it close to us, to discover who we are, to meet old friends again.
And of course, that's what keeps our tradition alive, which is why it keeps going from generation to generation.
Okay, so that was our
Amazing. This is great. Enjoy Dvarim, everybody. Have a meaningful Tisha B'Av, and we will see you guys all next week. Be well.
Enjoy Mishneh Torah, read it again and read it once more. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you all next week. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Ben Bargag tells us to turn it over, turn it over, turn it over. What's one book, one Torah passage, one prayer, or even one song that you've returned to again and again? What did you discover the 10th time that you completely missed the first? Share it in the comments. I promise to read every one of them.